Hello everyone, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Hi, hello. Welcome to a little chatty video that I've had in the back of my brain for a little bit, where I want to discuss changing your mind on book ratings, how you feel about books, rereading books and realizing that your original opinion was wrong, all of that good stuff. Now, this was originally inspired back when I was doing a little bit of a reading challenge, when I was having like a random number generator, basically pick the books I was gonna read in July, I do believe, where it had me read the sequel to this book, and I realized that I had not read this book since 2020. And I remembered nothing about it except for the magic system, because the magic system was really cool to me. And I was like, okay, great, we're gonna reread this, and then we're gonna go into the sequel. I remember rating this 5 stars in 2020. I apologize for any clacking you hear in the background. That is Freya playing with her toy, kicking a ball around her scratcher. She's having a great time. When I reread this, it went from a 5-star to a 3.5 star. Yeah, I know, that's a huge drop. And let me just say, 2020 Jenna was feeling a lot of feelings. She was going through a lot, and she was also not as critical a reader as I am now. Not as aware reader, not as a well-read reader, okay? I have read so many absolutely fan-fucking-tastic books in my life since this moment, and I think coming back to it was very beneficial to me, because it had me really realize that rereading books and changing my mind on books is totally fine. Because of course, every time you read a book at a different point in your life, at a different time, different situation, things are gonna affect your opinion on these books. And I think that is totally okay. And this is one of my favorite things about rereading books. Not only the fact that my memory is not that great when it comes to books, and I love rereading books that it's like a favorite book. I reread them all the time. You guys have, if you've been on my channel long enough, you know I have done this with Empire of Exiles and Relics of Ruin. 2 of my absolute favorite books of all time. I have read Empire of Exiles 4 times and Relics of Ruin 3 times in the same year. So like, if these are not solidified as some of my favorite books of all time, and my opinions on these books are never gonna change, they're just gonna get better and better, that's one of these things. So what I love about rereading is that you get something different from a book every time. That really cements itself when you pick up these books that you haven't read for 5 years. Sure, when you're rereading a book that you read in February, and then in April, and then in May, and then in September, like, of course it's gonna be a very similar opinion. But the way that I read these books over and over was different, because I read Empire of Exiles the first time as a reader, and I fell in love with it. Then I read it a second time as a writer to see what Erin was doing. And then when that first reread of a book, when you realize the author was like sowing seeds all the way through, and you're like seeing all these little intricate details, and you're like, oh my God. And then the third time I read it through was just for fun, because I loved it so much. And then the 4th time I read Empire through, I was doing the book club reread book podcast thing. There's a word for it that I can't really remember, with Erin herself and Trevor on their podcast, writing about dragons and shit for their book club of a rereading of Empire of Exiles. And we were like examining things, asking Erin questions, and I was getting something else from the book again. So that is my favorite thing about rereading, is that you're getting something different every time you visit that story. Just like I love rewatching my favorite shows over and over and over again, and favorite movies over and over and over again, it becomes a comfort place. I can say that for sure. These characters are comfort characters for me. We have Tunuk and Quill and Amadea and Yini and Richa, and they become my favorite characters of all time. They become like part of my entire soul and being and makeup, right? And then things like Pride and Prejudice, I've read a number of times over, and every time I reread that book, it feels like I'm coming home, because it is just that kind of a read, which is why I'm such a big advocate for rereading books, you know? So like, you're gonna go find your favorite book and reread it, and some people I know can't reread books because they find it a little ridiculous to read something that they have already read, but I think it's so beneficial, because not only do you get to experience a story you've already read before in a different capacity, you have more knowledge about the story, you get to see how it was made, you kind of get to see a little bit behind the curtain, and then you also get to realize things that you might not have realized the first time. and it's just such a delightful experience. Anyways, so that is why I'm a big advocate of rereading. Also because I like to, if I'm going to continue a series, which I'm very bad at doing, as you guys know, continuing with series is not my strong suit. I have like 90 some odd series on the go. That's even after like regularly going through my series list to remove some off the list that I'm no longer interested in reading, right? So it's I'm really bad at it. But when I do want to continue with a series, most of the time, if I have not read that first book recently, I will go back, reread that first book to remind myself of what's going on, the tone of the story, what the writer was doing, and then I keep reading, and usually that is my favorite way to do things. I love to reread the first book and get that whole story in one fell swoop. That is what I did with The Merciful Crow. And when I came out of it, having dropped it 2.5 stars from a 5-star to a 3.5 star, I was not mad at this book, actually. It was just a realization that 2020 me, when I first read this book, this was, at the time, one of the best books that she had read, which is a little sad, but also really exciting to then realize how much 2020 me has read and loved since, and gotten to read some like even better books, you know? And of course, back then I was also willy-nilly with my 5 stars. And my friends regularly tell me I need to have more fun and more whimsy in my life when I'm rating my books, but then I come back, my Virgo ass basically says like, hey, no. No, thank you. I really like keeping things specific and objective and more just well thought out. Of course, like, I think I started using the Cawpile rating system, which is Cawpile. It was created by G for Book Roast on YouTube. And for the past few years, not this past year, but previous years, she released a spreadsheet, a Google Sheets, with that Cawpile algorithmic calculation, if you will, embedded in the spreadsheet. So as you fill it out, it like gives you a rating at the end, whether it's 4-star, 4.5 star, etc. So I have been using that since 2021, and I have been more critical of what I've been reading since then. And I think every year I just get more of a better reader, a more critical reader, a better like thinker about what I'm reading, especially as I am active on the book internet and with people who read diversely and read with this critical eye. And it is incredibly important that we do this as readers, because in this world we live in, there are so many non-critical thinkers. And people have lost the ability to read and to consume media critically. I have an English degree. Of course I do. Of course I do. That was my favorite part of reading all of the classic literature, is coming at it from a modern day experience and a lens, and also discussing it in class and realizing all these different themes that are happening and all this kind of stuff. So coming out of an English degree, having an English degree, and then going into reading more fun books, if you will, rather than just the classics, it's really nice to flex that muscle and read critically, especially in the world we live in, as I said. So I love that I changed my mind on The Merciful Crow. I have done that on many books, and whether that is in the positive way or the negative way, it depends on the book. Now, I've already talked about one of my favorite books of all time, which is Empire of Exiles. Let's talk about Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, because this I originally rated 4.5 stars. It took 3 rereads for me to cement this as my favorite book of all time. And that is because I believe Tamsin Muir's books are created to be reread. Here's the thing. I rated this 4.5 stars the first time around because I was confused as fuck this entire way through. But I knew coming to the end of it, I was like, oh, this was really good. Holy shit. And then I read it a second time and my mind was blown wide open. 5 stars, amazing. And then that third time, it just cemented itself as my favorite book of all time. I think there's something to say about books that are written. I don't know if Tamsin actually went into this going, I want to write a book that people want to reread. Like, I don't think that was her goal. But there are some books out there that I believe genuinely you get a better experience from the more you reread them. And The Locked Tomb is one of those series. I don't know if you can hear the really slow, gentle clinking of the wooden balls in Freya's wooden scratcher. But I built her a little house out of a box, a blanket, and her scratcher. I just know that she's laying on her side, just like flicking the ball with one hand because it's lazy. It's lazy. She's having a great time. Here is the culprit, the criminal, if you will. Look at this thing. Are you the star of the show? Are you giving them some razzle? There's no dazzle today, just a little razzle. Hey? Hey, baby? Yeah. You have any opinions on changing your mind on books? No. Yeah. I know. You're such a good girl. Okay. Go ahead. Anyways, as I was saying, The Locked Tomb is just one of those series that I believe you get more out of the more you reread it. And especially when you have as skilled a crafter of story as Tamsin Muir is. I feel like other authors are definitely like this as well. Like, I have never reread The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, but I feel like rereading that would be an entirely different experience than reading it the first time. Because The Spear Cuts Through Water is such a complex story, I think rereading something like that would be so fascinating to do because of the intricacies of how it's written. I'm sure there's more books, but they're just not coming to mind, but like, it's just rereading a book that is complex. Ooh, actually, there's an example of this directly from my university career. There is an author, James Joyce, who wrote The Dubliners and all that kind of stuff. He is an author who packs in meaning to every single word choice in a sentence. I know this because my professor has said that there are people who study his works and study one singular short story of James Joyce's for years and still have more to unpack because there is just so much packed into what James Joyce's choices are, you know? So there are a lot of authors that do that. And I think rereading is so beneficial to learning more about an author's work. Of course, you don't even have to reread a book to change your mind on said book. Like, as I said in this video previously, when I was a little younger, my ratings were just like, I was just throwing out 5 stars willy-nilly because I would often rate a book immediately upon finishing it. And I experienced this like complete euphoria when I finish a book that casts the book in a better light than it might necessarily have been. So a lot of my 5 stars from my first few years of rating books are not actual 5-star books, or it was just pure enjoyment for me. It wasn't actually like, this book was amazing. You know, it was one of those. So actually changing your mind on books, beneficial as shit. And there's also things to say when you find out stuff about an author and you think about their work, you know, the problematic authors of today, you think about their work and you realize how terrible some of the things they had in their books were, and you go, oh yeah, no, like, I don't actually want to share my love of that book anymore. I don't like that book anymore. I don't agree with anything that the author is doing. So like, it has completely tainted my view of this book, and thus I will drop my rating of it, or thus I will just remove it off my shelves. That is valid and good. You should be doing that with a lot of these authors that are coming out today and being their true selves on social media. And we are getting a front row seat on that social media and realizing how terrible they are, you know? Like using the murder of a Black woman to promote a cover. And even though that the Black community has come out and asked this author multiple times to remove said post and to say something on how horrid it is to use the death of a Black woman to promote your own work, that post still remains. Or recently, Robert Jackson Bennett has come out with some really wishy-washy stances on the Palestinian genocide and also is okay with generative AI. If you want to know more about that, go check out this account on Instagram because they have screenshots and done the research, and it is so incredibly eye-opening. We have TJ Klune, who is a really renowned cozy writer with his House in the Cerulean Sea series. Let me tell you, you will never see me ever promoting his books anywhere. And anytime someone is promoting his books, I have to come in the comments and make sure someone, if no one else is, I'm there saying, hey, don't promote his shit. Because that white man used and was inspired by the 60s scoop and residential schools, the incredible trauma of Indigenous folks in Canada and the US to write these books. And he has never said anything or apologized for anything after many different Indigenous folks have come out and said, hey, this is not okay. You should, address these concerns, that you not only were inspired by these incredibly traumatic stories that are not yours to share as a white man, you have not said anything to apologize for this. And also the actual representation of these marginalized children in these books is incredibly harmful to that rhetoric of being inspired by the stories of Indigenous children going through this trauma. Like, you're telling me you have a boy who is a literal dog most of the time, and this dog is incredibly vicious, is inspired by one of these stories. You also have a little antichrist who's inspired by the stories. You have literal monstrous children as your inspiration for Indigenous. I'm so mad about that, okay? So no, I will never support those authors on my channel. And it is incredibly important to always stay abreast of what is happening, especially in the political climate of today, because you just get authors doing random shit online. And yeah, okay, we live in a world where 10 years ago, authors weren't as online as they are now. And sure, maybe that was a better time. I think now is better because we are more aware of the content that we are consuming. We are more aware of the people who we are supporting and who we are keeping on our shelves, whose work we are currently consuming, you know, and whose ideologies we are consuming and all this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, reading is political, point blank. If you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you should know that. I believe reading is political, point blank. I am an author that consistently wants to put those ideologies, my ideologies, in my books because I believe I want to create a safe space for people who are marginalized, who are hated upon, who are oppressed on the daily, who are killed, who are lynched in 2025. So I have a lot of opinions about this, as you can very much tell, but that is also another reason to change your opinions on books and to remove books from shelves, okay? I do not want to see your Hogwarts house in your bio anymore. Not when JKR is out here using her dollars that you are giving her by supporting that fandom to directly fund negativity and terrible bills and the harassment and oppression and the deaths of trans people in this world. You know what I mean? Anyways, changing your mind on books. It can just be from rereading and it can be learning more about the author. All the things. I'm so sorry, I did not anticipate going on that rant in the middle of this, but it is important to say and to express. So, yes, changing your mind on books is very important. Now, there's also been a few, not only the Merciful Crow, books that I have reread that my mind has changed negatively. Negatively, I say. The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah was originally a 5-star read for me, and upon reread, this is a 4-star book. I did rate it 4.5 stars upon rereading it this year, but again, thinking about it, living with the story a little bit more, realizing all these different things, it is a 4-star book. And that is okay to change your mind on things, you know? And or, much like Gideon the Ninth, I've reread Legendborn now 3 times. The first time I read Legendborn, 5 stars. Second time, I think I dropped it to 4.5 stars. I was not in the mood for Brie, and I was a little bit more, read it for the 3rd time this year. This is a 5-star book, without a doubt. Like, this is a stunning piece of literature. I wish I had this as a kid. I would have eaten this shit up, okay? This is one of the best YA books, if not the best YA book that I have ever read. It is so well written, so well crafted. The character work is incredible. It's a 5-star. Like, I cannot find anything wrong with this book. And that makes it a 5-star. And it's also amazing. And I love it so much. 5-star. Favorite. You know what I mean? So there's opinions like that you can read things once, twice, 3 times. You can change your mind each time. Depends on the mood, of course. And then there are books out there that I very much believe that you can read at the wrong time. When you reread it at the correct time, changing your mind on this book is so important and so well deserved as well, because I did that with the Poppy War. I originally read this back when I was doing a little bit of a series of like reading your booktubers' favorites books or whatever, back when the Poppy War like was first starting to become really big. And I did not love this book. It did not sit well with me. I was like, I recognize this is something that I should absolutely love. And yet upon reading it for the first time, I was like, it just is not hitting the way it should for me, because I recognize I'm reading it at the wrong time. I reread it when I went to go read the entire series of this, and the Poppy War is, I think I rated it like a 3.5 star the first time I read it. It is more of a 4.5 star for me. It's not a perfect book. There are flaws, but I highly, highly enjoyed it the second time I read it, and I came around to the fact that it is a fantastic book. And then there are books where you might DNF it and then you come back to it one day and you go, oh no, actually this was really good. I just wasn't in the right mood for it, or something was off about it, or I needed to read it in a different format, which is something that I did very, very recently with Maddie Martinez's book that just came out, The Maiden and Her Monster. This book I had the e-arc for it. I read 37% of it. I don't know if it was my mood. I don't know if it was the actual book. I don't know what was going on. I hated it. I was having so much trouble with this book, reading it just with my eyes on my e-reader, you know. I told myself, once I found out that it was sapphic, I wanted to give it another shot when the audiobook was available to me. And I completely forgot that I had also requested the ALC. I got the ALC a day later, so I decided to try it that same week, having that original terrible reaction to the book. I came back to it with the audiobook in my ears and had a completely different experience of the story. Granted, I only rated this 3.5 stars coming out of it, but I recognized that it was a genuinely good book and that my original issues with the book may have been a little wrong. Sure, a lot of my issues were with the characterization of the main character, but it did change by the end of the book. And I did get a different feel of reading this book via audiobook as well. And you guys know, if you've been on my channel for a while, if you follow my reading vlogs, I am a big tandem reader, which means I listen to the audiobooks and read physically at the same time, or read ebook. I have the words in front of my eyes and also coming in my ears. And that, to me, is my favorite way of absorbing a story, because you're not only getting the words on the page, you're getting someone telling it to you in a specific way. You're getting tones of voice. You're getting a little bit more atmospheric in the actual reading of the story. And that helped this book a lot, because this book is incredibly atmospheric. And I think that helps a lot, is changing the way that you are reading a book. And I also think that when you go to reread a book, if you have trouble rereading a book in the original way you were reading it, try it in a different format. Try the audiobook. Because it changes things. It gives you a new perspective, a new way of experiencing the story. And I think that helps as well, especially with books that you may not have really enjoyed the first time, but the second time you're like, I might give this a try because I know this is something that I should like, thus I must try again. You know? Overall, I think that changing your opinion on books is incredibly okay. It happens all the time. And I think if I was to go back and look at my original 5 stars from 5 years ago, from 2020, when I was reading things like The Merciful Crow and having opinions on them and reading those 5 stars again, my opinions would most likely be changing, because I am a more critical reader and I am a different person than 5 years ago now, right? So it's an interesting thought experiment, and I might eventually do that. And I have books on my shelves like Raybearer by Jordan Afueko that I was reading around the same time that I do need to reread before going into the second book in that series. I anticipate liking that one about the same that I did the first time I read it, because I recognize how wonderful of a book that is and how beautiful of a book that is. And I know from being on the book internet that people absolutely ate up that duology and love the standalone that came out of that world as well, The Maiden and Her Crocodile. And that's all on my TBR, and I'm so excited to experience those books again for Raybearer, and then for the first time for the second one in that duology, and then Maiden, Her Crocodile on its own, and get to experience that author's betterment in her craft. Is that a way to say that? Sure. Because it is her first, her second, and her third book, so I assume that she's gotten better with every book that she's written. I really like having an open mind when it comes to books. I love rereading books, as I keep saying, and as you guys probably know. I love rereading books because that allows me to be more fluid with my opinions on books. And I love being on the book internet because that allows me to be more informed about the content that I have read or might be reading. That's incredibly important to me as a person, because I want to make sure that I am consuming and sharing what I'm consuming mindfully, and making sure that I'm not recommending books to you guys that are by terrible people, you know? Maybe not necessarily terrible people, but like people with a little suspicious ideologies and morals, and people that I might not want to support, or I would even want to be in contact with in my real life. You know what I mean? So let me know down below if you have ever changed your mind on a book, whether that is having read a book, been like, oh my God, 5 stars. And then a month later, you're like, actually, was that even that good of a book? I don't want to keep that my rating, you know, whether it's a book like that or a book like Gideon the Ninth, where I've reread multiple times and then it became a favorite book after reading it for 3 times over. Or whether you have read a book at the wrong time, DNF'd a book because you just weren't feeling it and came back to it and ended up liking it a whole lot more. I would love to know down below your opinions, your thoughts, all of this kind of stuff, because I love having these discussions. I love talking things through with you guys, and I want to be very clear about my opinions and my morals and my choices on my channel, in my life, as an author and as a creator, because I genuinely believe creating a safe space for folks who are of the LGBTQ plus community, like I am, is incredibly important. And also creating a safe space for everybody of any skin color, of any background, of any kind of thing, as a white person, is incredibly important for me to do, because I want to make sure that you guys know I love you and I want to be there for you no matter what, and I never want to be spewing rhetoric that is harmful to you guys or recommending a book that is harmful. That is my video for you guys today. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video very soon. Stay kind and keep on reading.